Good morning. I'm so excited to share this work with you all. Let's start with a show of hands. How many people have heard of Carol Dweck's growth mindset? Of Stanford being here, right? Okay, great. We are going to quickly, I don't see all hands here, so I'm going to quickly talk about a little bit about mindset as we have come to know it in educational settings and in organizational settings. But I'm quickly going to move forward as to some of the problems that we've encountered as mindset has literally gone viral and global around the world, and how we have seen some misapplications and our newest understanding and how mindset actually works. So let me take you back to where this whole idea of mindset cultures comes from, okay? So I was in graduate school here at Stanford, just in psychology. And in the PhD program, it's pretty typical for graduate students to have to present their research to their faculty members every single year. So I was in an auditorium, much like this, a seminar. It was a little smaller, it was a bit of a seminar room. And I'm watching and supporting a friend of mine who's giving his fourth year PhD talk. So this is almost at the end of his PhD. And he's up there presenting his life's work, really excited to do that. And all of a sudden, in the middle of his talk, someone from these seats over here, a professor, a male professor, just shouts out from the middle of nowhere and says, well, it's clear the fatal flaw in all of this work is XYZ. And we all look at him like, oh my God, I can't believe that was just said. And my friend tries to engage. Well, actually, that's not really a problem here in this work because blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden, from a seat over on that side of the room, another professor shouts out, no, the problem isn't ABC, the problem is XYZ. And suddenly, these two professors are fighting amongst themselves to see who's the smartest in the room of these two professors, right? Who can find the fatal flaw the quickest and deliver the most devastating remark to my friend who's up there talking about his own work. And this was my first glimpse into what we have now come to call these more fixed mindset cultures, where you have to prove you're either smart or you're not. You either have it or you don't, right? And you have to prove it every time you are in front of other people. So it's about your latest performance and how good you are or not. And I saw what it did to my friend, right? A lot of speech disfluencies, losing focus, not really being able to answer the questions that are there because the stress of it is so big. But not just that immediate humiliation kind of bothered me, but what actually happened with my friend was that that was such a devastating experience that he decided, again, not to pursue that particular line of his research any longer, and he switched topics. He didn't want to touch that work for weeks and then months, and then decided to change topics ultimately because that situation was just really traumatic, right? So he ended up spending a few more years in the PhD program having to change his research topic. 2 weeks later, I'm in a different seminar. Still psychology, but a different kind of psychology now, and the faculty there are treating the student presentations very differently, right? In that environment, the faculty were still competing against each other because it's academia, but they were competing now to see who could actually not only identify the problems, but think about the best solutions in order to improve the project. So they were saying things like, oh, have you tried this measure? Have you thought about using this kind of population to do your research with? That would help answer these questions. And so what we saw there in that environment was that it was, instead of proving and performing, how smart are you, do you have it or do you not have it, it was more about learning and development. And it was this idea that we're going to learn and develop together. And this was my first glimpse into that growth mindset culture, right? The idea that talent and ability is something that we are going to build together in order to achieve success. So as I sat in these two different environments, Carol Dweck had just arrived to Stanford from Columbia, and mindset was in the air. And as I thought about these two environments, I thought, these are two different theories about how to motivate people. One, throw them in the deep end, prove and perform, sink or swim. You either have it or you don't, a fixed mindset culture. Or This is how we learn, we grow, we develop together. We're going to find the problems, and we're going to think of solutions, and then we're going to experiment with them, right? And I saw what that growth-minded culture seminar did to the students who were there. They were able to stay focused. They were able to participate in brainstorming of how to improve their project. And ultimately, they left with like 6 or 7 ideas that they could apply immediately that afternoon to improve their project. Guess who made more quick progress? Guess whose projects actually had better outcomes from Seminar 1 or Seminar 2, right? Right, exactly. And so I took this idea down the hallway, this idea that there's these 2 different ways of motivating that are cultural in nature. It's about the norms. It's about the powerful people in those contexts and the cultures they're creating. And I took it to Carol's office, knocked on her door. I said, Carol, I know that for 30 years, we have thought about mindset as something inside our mind. What's your mindset? How does it affect you? What's my mindset? How does it affect me? Has anyone ever thought of mindset as a cultural feature, a cultural variable that actually impacts everyone in the context? And she looked at me in her Carol way, and she kind of smiled, and she was like, no, Mare, no one's ever thought about it that way. We should do this work together. And that was in 2005. And since then, together, we have done this work, and my students and now many more people in the field have really started to think differently about mindset. It used to be that we used to think about mindset like this, as an individual feature, moving from fixed to growth. Now we know there are more layers to the story. Now we know that the situations and interactions that we have with others also shifts our mindset. And we know that mindset cultures can exist on organizations, teams, and larger groups, divisions, that sort of thing. So I always want to pay homage to the godmother of mindset, right, Carol Dweck, and all she's brought to this work and to the original work on mindset. And so here I'll talk a little bit about how it's traditionally been considered, and then what are some of the updates that we've seen in the last 10 years or so, and how do we apply it in our own lives. So when Carol first talked about mindset, she talked about 2 types of mindsets, right? The first mindset, she talked about mindset as about talent, intelligence, personality, and ability. And she talked about these 2 types as either the fixed mindset, which holds that talent, intelligence, personality, these abilities, they're relatively fixed traits, right? And you either have them or you don't. They can be changed. They can't be changed very much from when you are born. You might build them a little bit through some learning and development, but there's kind of a ceiling, a limit, right, on our talent, intelligence, or abilities. That's the fixed mindset view. And this is often contrasted with the growth mindset view, which holds that, how we actually hear and see about this. We've done studies now around the world with adults around the world, more than 500,000 respondents around the world, and we see what does it sound like when people are in more of their fixed mindset. And so this is some of our qualitative data that we have been gathering. It sounds like, listen, I'm either good at it or I'm not. Or when I'm frustrated, I tend to give up. And as I said, this fixed mindset view is often contrasted with the growth mindset, which holds that those same things, talent, intelligence, personality, ability, these things are malleable. They're things we can develop. And how do we develop them? We develop them through effective effort, applying the right strategies, and seeking some help when we are stuck. How does this look like and sound like in the real world? Well, we hear people say things like, look, I can learn anything if I want to. If I'm really motivated, I know I can master or learn anything. Or when I'm frustrated, instead of giving up, I persevere. So if you have seen anything about mindset, it's likely you've seen some image like this. If you Google growth mindset and you look at the Google images, you're going to see a whole bunch of memes that look like this. And the reason why I call it the old way, the 1.0 version of mindset, are a few reasons. First of all, notice where mindset is. It's in the mind, literally in the brain somewhere, right? I don't know if the MRI has shown, oh, there's a growth mindset, I don't know. But that's where it suggests it is. And everything good associated with the growth mindset is there in green. Everything bad associated with the fixed mindset is there in pink. And notice even the title. What kind of mindset do you have? Does anyone see the irony of this? Like, you either have the fixed mindset or you have the growth mindset, and you have to pick one or the other. It's like a very fixed way of thinking about the fixed and the growth mindset. And yet, when I talk to teachers who say, oh yeah, I've been trained on growth mindset, because now it's in almost every teacher training. Teach for America, many graduate schools of education teach mindset in this way. I will see posters on the walls like this in their classrooms. And in organizational settings, when learning and development folks are teaching about mindset, a lot of times it's through this kind of model, right? So what's the real problem of thinking about mindset in this way? I think there's at least 3 problems with this. The first problem is that literally, you can see in that meme, it really sets up this false dichotomy, this either or. You either have the fixed mindset or you have the growth mindset, right? But we know, even from the original research, that we all have both mindsets, right? Let's see, this clicker is, there we go. We all have both mindsets, and it exists on a continuum. We call it the mindset continuum. The other problem with this is that it makes us think that mindset is located only in the head, when the truth is that we know that mindset shifts based on the people and the situations around us. Let's see if anyone's with me on this. So at the end of a long day, I go home, I'm exhausted, I've been working all day, and I have a very fixed mindset view about how that dishwasher should be loaded. Right? I mean, we all have fixed mindsets about certain things. Let's not hide those fixed mindsets. Let's notice when our fixed mindsets are coming up. Sometimes they're a problem, sometimes they're not that big of a problem. But let's just acknowledge, rather than hide and stigmatize, those fixed mindset contexts and times where our mindset comes up, so that we can actually recognize it and decide whether we're comfortable with being in the fixed mindset at that moment. At that moment, I'm fine with it. Talk to my husband, he might be unfine with it, but you know. The last problem with this kind of false dichotomy, fixed versus growth kind of situation, locating it just in our mind, is then what is the solution when we find people or ourselves in our fixed mindset? The solution becomes just change your mind. Now, I'm a social psychologist. I know how difficult that actually is to ask people to do consistently. And if we are thinking about organizational settings or educational settings, what it means is that we have to target every single individual, and we have to get them to change their mind each time. It's not a sustainable or robust strategy when we're just thinking about mindset in the mind, and that's the mechanism of change. Instead, we know that yes, we can change individuals, but the better, more robust, and sustainable way to change individuals' mindsets is going to be to change the culture around them. Because cultural norms are very powerful, as I know all of you in here know, and people are more likely to align with those cultural norms, moving to their growth mindset more of the time if they are embedded in a growth mindset culture. So if I could make this even bigger, I would. This is a huge takeaway from this. Individual mindset is not enough if you really want to have sustainable and robust change in different working and learning contexts. Let me show you, I'm an academic, so let me show you the one study. I will promise not a lot of data graphs, but just this one, that really changed my mind about why this is true, that individual mindset is not enough, that it's not just enough, as we have for 30 years, focused on individual mindset. So in this study, this is a study in collaboration with Carol, with David Yeager, and about 15 to 20 other researchers around the world. We did this study where we created these growth mindset learning modules. And we included all the science behind the growth mindset, especially the neuroscience about how effective effort, taking on new strategies, seeking help when you're stuck, actually not only grows the brain cells, but also the connections between them. And so we created these scientific modules, and then we gathered a sample of more than 12,000 first-year high school students across the United States in a nationally representative sample using experimental gold standard randomized control trial kind of design. And what we wanted to know was whether receiving and learning about the growth mindset, the students at the beginning of their high school time, would it have impact on two outcomes. The first one is a replication of Carol's previous work and much of the research in growth mindset. Would it actually improve these students' grades? Does it have an impact to learn about the growth mindset on performance? That was number one. Number two we wanted to see was what we thought about as, you might think about it as like intellectual challenge, right? Risk-taking, challenge-seeking. In the American context, some of the most difficult high school courses are these advanced STEM courses after Algebra 2 and beyond. Those are some of the most difficult ones. So the question is, if you get growth mindset training at the beginning of high school, are you more likely to actually put yourself in more challenging intellectual environments and seek out these more advanced courses? That was our question. What did we find? Indeed, receiving the growth mindset program at the beginning of high school did have an impact longitudinally over time on their high school GPA, their performance, and it also increased this intellectual risk-taking, right? Seeking out these advanced STEM courses. But we didn't do a randomized control trial with 12,000 students around the country to only replicate previous work. We wanted to look at heterogeneity. I wanted to know where it doesn't work. Any ideas? Any ideas? Great. In areas where the surrounding is very restrictive, where might that be? One of the answers is? One of the places is teachers. You can think about this as leaders. When teachers, the leaders of these classrooms, had more fixed mindset beliefs or engaged in more fixed-minded teaching practices, teaching the students about the growth mindset had literal zero impact on their grades or intellectual risk-taking. It was only in the context where they had a growth mindset instructor, teacher, leader, that teaching those students about the growth mindset had any positive impact on their grades or intellectual risk-taking. The second place it didn't work was around this environment question, where the teacher, the leader of that classroom, did not pay attention and create a culture, a peer culture among the students. And so in the environments in which students were unsupportive of these growth-minded behaviors, it was not cool to ask a question in class, clarification, or to make a mistake, or to be really excited about your learning, right? When there was unsupportive peers in the learning environment, then learning about the growth mindset at the individual level had zero impact. Again, statistically zero impact on their grades and their intellectual risk-taking. It was only in the context in which the instructor, the leader, had created this culture in which all the students could be excited about challenges and making mistakes and learning from those mistakes and supporting each other. No one's going to be left behind in this learning in this classroom. There, you see learning about the growth mindset had big impacts for students on their grades and their risk-taking. So I argue here that this study really shows that we need a bit of a mindset reset. From thinking about mindset just as a quality in our mind to start to think about what are these environments, what are these situations that we're creating that are more fixed or growth-minded in nature, and what's the impact of that on people's outcomes. So if we're not going to be thinking about mindset in this fixed-minded, false dichotomy way, what's a better model to actually be thinking about mindset? Well, we're going to go back to the way some of the original work was created, always measured on a Likert scale, right? There's a continuum, and we all move between our fixed and growth mindset. So recognizing that A, we all have both mindsets, and B, those mindsets move. Let's see if I can get this to move forward itself as I say the word move. I think it's over here. Yes, okay. It exists along this mindset continuum, and we are going to move between our mindsets based on different situations. And I call these situational triggers, mindset triggers, and there's 4 of them. We're going to talk about them right now. So what are those mindset triggers? As I said, there's 4. And they are evaluative situations, high effort situations, critical feedback, and the success of others. Now, I'm going to go through each one in a little bit of detail and tell you some stories and show you some qualitative data of what this looks like and sounds like. But as I do this, I want you to be thinking about which ones resonate for you in your own experience and maybe in your work context, with your teams, in your organization. Which ones do you see as most relevant in your context? And we are going to vote at the end live to sort of see which mindset triggers do we have represented here among our group today. Okay? So let's get into it with the first mindset trigger. The first mindset trigger is evaluative situations. What's an evaluative situation? It is when we are being asked to do something that we know is going to be evaluated by others. We're anticipating being evaluated. So I might be asked to write a big report, or to make a big presentation, or to pitch a new idea to my team. And I know many people are going to be thinking or reading or watching that presentation, and they're going to be evaluating me based on what they think, how well the thing I produced went. If this is our fixed mindset trigger, we adopt certain goals for that presentation, for that report I'm writing. And it's to look smart at all costs, because in a fixed mindset context, you're either smart or you're not. So you better show, right, that you're perfect, that you're smart, that you've got it. And that changes the way that we, for example, make things like presentations. We might leave no time for Q&A because we don't really want people to question our ideas at the very end, right, in the fixed mindset. Whereas for others, these evaluative situations, they see them as opportunities, and they move towards their growth mindset every time they get the request to do one of these evaluative tasks. And there they take on a different goal. Rather than figuring out how to look smart at all costs, they are looking at how to learn at all costs. So they might be peppering their presentation with some of the challenges that they had experienced when trying this new project. And they might say, here were some of our solutions that we created from the challenges we had, and here are some of the challenges we see in this new project. I want to hear what your solutions might be for those new challenges, right? They're gathering information, they're learning, even while producing something that is likely to be evaluated by others. How does this sound in the real world? This was actually a CEO from a Fortune 500 company who said, listen, the main thing I want to do when I do my work is to show how good I am at it. That's what it sounds like in the fixed mindset around these evaluative situations. In the growth mindset, it's much more important for me to learn things in my work than to get the highest, the very best evaluation. Let me tell you a little bit of a story of what this looks like and sounds like in the real world. Let me see if I can get back here to where this changes. There we go. How many people have seen the Last Dance documentary of Michael Jordan? Probably a lot of people here. Yep, some, not all. So if you don't know about Michael Jordan tried out for his high school basketball team, and he did not get chosen. Why? His coach thought he was too short to play basketball. So what did he do? Every morning and every afternoon after class, he would go to his local court, his basketball court in his neighborhood, and he would set for himself the task of making shots around the different parts of the court. And he had to make a certain number before he went home at the end of the day for dinner. And so he kind of set the task for himself. He's there. But he didn't count baskets if they just went in, if the ball just went into the basket. He only counted it, one, when the ball went into the basket without hitting the rim, right? This is mastery. He was practicing in anticipation of the next evaluative situation where he was going to try out in his second year for that same basketball team, right? So this is sort of like on steroids. This is growth mindset in evaluative situations, right? And he talks about it himself. He has said things like, let's see, he said, I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. Notice how he's counting his losses. He's paying attention. He's not putting his head in the sand around them. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot, and I missed. I failed over and over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeeded. Right? So this is an example of, in those evaluative situations, moving to your growth mindset instead of your fixed mindset. That's a mindset trigger situation. The second situation, mindset trigger, is high effort situations. These are things in which we're asking people to take on a stretch assignment or to learn a totally new domain or to take on a new role. And suddenly there's a lot of learning. There's a lot of new ways of working. AI is a great example of a high effort situation for many people, right? Having to learn new ways of working and new technology and new case uses for this kind of technology. For a lot of people, high effort situations move people straight into their fixed mindset. Why? Because we have this belief about the negative correlation between effort and ability. If I have to try hard, it means that maybe this isn't for me. Maybe I'm not naturally good at it, right? And people don't like the feeling of having to try hard at things, right? It makes them doubt their own skills, their abilities. And so in the fixed mindset, these high effort situations, we believe they should come naturally. And so in these situations where we have to apply new effort, it moves us into that fixed mindset. Whereas in the growth mindset, the idea of hard work is endemic. It is imperative that that's the only way you make progress. And so they believe, those who move into their growth mindset around these high effort situations, believe that hard work, good strategies, help from others, that's the only way to move forward. So let me tell you an example of what this looks like and sounds like. So in the fixed mindset, to tell you the truth, when I work hard, it doesn't make me feel like I'm very smart. Versus the harder you work at something, the better you'll be, right? Believing that effort is actually the key to the success. Let me tell you a story about this. So I was here on campus in graduate school, and I come for my first year, and I noticed that all of the undergraduate students are just like hanging out all the time. You might have noticed this yesterday on a beautiful day. The students are just like in the area, in the green areas, in the union, just like hanging out all the time. I thought, does anyone around here ever go to class? Is anyone ever learning around here? What's going on? What is, and you can actually Google this. It's an actual thing, and it is called the Stanford Duck Syndrome. And what does it mean? It actually means that a lot of students come to Stanford, and they, just like a duck swimming in a pond, right? They want to be at the very top of the water, looking so cool and graceful, water just flowing off their back, no problem. But underneath, they're kicking like crazy. They just don't want you to see. So they'd go home at the end of a day of hanging out, and they'd start to study, and it's the middle of the night. They're studying starting at midnight till 2 or 3 in the morning, but they just don't want anyone to know that they have to work that hard, right, in order to be good in this more elite learning environment. This is a fixed mindset way of responding to these high effort situations like college, like a new learning environment, like a new kind of role or activity at work. The third mindset trigger is critical feedback. Now, instead of anticipating being evaluated by others, now we are actually receiving the feedback and that evaluation, and the results are not so good, right? We get a little critical feedback. For a lot of us, this is our fixed mindset trigger, because that feedback starts to feel like personal, right? It's about us. It's not about the work. Whereas in the growth mindset, if we can turn this around and make it a growth mindset trigger every time we get critical feedback, we can put ourselves into learning mode, right? That it's not about me, it's about learning. So what does this look like and sound like in the real world? We see that the consequences of this is that in our fixed mindset, we want to be perfect. We want to hide our mistakes, hide our deficiencies, because in that fixed mindset world, you either have it or you don't. Any mistake is taken as a sign that maybe you don't belong here, maybe you don't have it, maybe we made a mistake in hiring you or putting you in this role, right? And you're trying to avoid that critical feedback coming at you. Whereas in the growth mindset, you are motivated to confront your mistakes and your deficiencies. In fact, you get frustrated when people don't give you critical feedback because it feels like they're not invested in your learning and your development, right? That's how you know this is a growth mindset trigger for you in the critical feedback. So what does this look like and sound like, as I've said? The example I like to give here is the story of the backpack kid. You might have been the backpack kid growing up, or you might have had the backpack kid, or if you're kid adjacent, you might know a backpack kid. The backpack kid is the kid who, goes to school, doesn't do as well as they would like on one of their exams or tests or assignments, and they have to get their parents to sign it so that the parents are aware of how the kid is doing. And what the kid looks at, they feel shame, they look at it, they're like, I didn't do as well as I wanted to. They crumple up the test or the assignment, and they stuff it to the bottom of the backpack, never to be seen again, right? And we have a lot of sympathy and empathy for the backpack kid because we know what they're feeling is really that they didn't meet their own standards and they didn't meet the standards of the teacher in the classroom, and so they're feeling a lot of shame in that moment. So we have a lot of sympathy for that kid. But what about the backpack adult, who every time they get their performance review, they look at the very top, did I meet or exceed standards? If not, I'll just put that away into a folder, never to be found again, at the bottom of the backpack of my desktop, right? And so that is another fixed mindset response to the trigger of critical feedback. What does it sound like next time? I only want to do the easy parts because I'm less likely to make a mistake or fail in that context. Versus in a growth mindset, you're much more likely to embrace challenges, take those intellectual risks. It was really helpful, that feedback you provided. I'm going to try that now. The last mindset trigger is success of others. And in this success of others, we like to call this the frenemy trigger, right? You're looking on LinkedIn and you're looking at people who are similar to you, people you might have gone to school with, and you're saying, oh, did that person get a promotion? How's that? Did the person win the award that I thought maybe I might get this year, right? So a lot of times, if we are leading teams as well, we are praising people on the team. What does that do to the other people who aren't receiving praise in that moment? For some, the success of others is their fixed mindset trigger because they think of success as relatively zero-sum. So if that person's getting praise, that means that maybe there's less success available for me. Relative to the growth mindset trigger of the success of others, which takes, instead of thinking about success as zero-sum, thinking about it as a pie that we can expand, that we can learn from others in order to improve ourselves. So what is the consequence of having this as a mindset trigger? We start to see people engaging in subtly unethical behavior if this is their fixed mindset trigger. Because they're thinking of success as zero-sum, they're going to do anything they can to outperform others. They might start to hoard information because information is power. Or they might start to leave people off calendar invites, right? Oh, by mistake, in order to be in rooms that really matter. Whereas in the growth mindset, engaging in that unethical behavior becomes actually counterproductive and unacceptable because there's no way to learn if we're not actually engaging in ethical behavior to learn from what we're doing and whether or not it works. It shortcuts and it bypasses our ability to actually learn what works and what doesn't. And so instead of doing anything to outperform others, if this is our true growth mindset trigger, we start to find ways to find inspiration and to learn from the success of other people. So what does it look like and sound like in the fixed mindset? Wow, she's so good at that. I look really dumb compared to her. And in the growth mindset, wow, she's so good at that. I'm going to ask her what she did to prepare. Right? Two different responses to the same kind of success of others. So now it's your turn. I'm going to have you turn to a person or two next to you, and I want you to think about which triggers do you see in yourself, and also for those that you either care for, mentor, or support. This can be in your family life, it can be in your work life, it can be in your community life. You know, which of these how do they show up, and what ideas have you had for changing them in the future? So let's have a little bit of a discussion. I'm going to put up on the slides a list of these triggers with some of the shorthand around them. We're going to take a couple of minutes, and I'll call us back, and then we're going to vote as to which ones we discussed. Okay? So take 2 or 3 minutes here. Go ahead. All right, here we are. Let's see where we came up with all together. Let's see if I can advance the slide here. I'm going to ask you to take out your phones. And we are going to take a picture, or take the QR code, and you can vote for more than one. You can vote for whichever ones that you feel are most relevant, that you see strongly in yourself or your team, those support, you mentor, the people you lead, people you're around. Let's see where the data are as it comes in. And notice, as we're doing this, that this is not your mother's mindset. This is not mindset in the mind. These are now replicable, noticeable situations that happen all the time that actually move us between our fixed and our growth mindset, right? So let's see all the data's coming in, 71, 77 people, 85 people coming in. All right, yes, 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 yes. 114 people, 122, let's see more people voting. Again, you can vote for more than one. All right, so let's say, feel free to keep voting, but it seems like critical feedback is going to be our number one mindset trigger in this room. And that is not surprising. Why? Because a lot of times our sense of self-worth, how good we are, how competent we are, relies on how other people think about us and are actually responding to us. So for a lot of us, that critical feedback is the thing that moves us more likely, kind of our default, into our fixed mindset. And so we have to work hard to recognize when that's happening. And if we happen to be in a role where we are providing critical feedback, how do we create that situation and provide feedback knowing that people on our team are likely going to have this as their fixed mindset trigger in a way that's going to move them to growth so they can actually hear us, so they can actually respond, they can actually learn about what the goodies are, what's the gold in the feedback that I'm trying to provide, right? All right, this is great. Yep, that's where it ended up. Okay. So I want us to take away from this idea that these are situations that we're constantly in. And you don't have to be a top leader in an organization to be creating culture. Culture happens when any two or more people are engaged in any interaction. There is a mindset culture present. And the question is, do you know what that mindset culture is and how it's impacting you and the person you're interacting with? So we are all culture creators. Let me give you a definition of what I mean when I am talking about this mindset culture. I am talking about the shared beliefs of people in a group. So that group can be 2 people, it can be bigger, it can be a company, a team, a work group, it could be a family. If you're like me, you grew up in a multi-sibling family and there was the smart kid who was good at school. There was the kid that was good at sports. There's the kid that's good at art. And we engaged in all the activities that were about how we were good, right? And then what does that do to us as adults? That's like unintentionally creating a bit of a fixed mindset culture in our own family context, right? And so just like mindset at the individual level, when we talk about mindset culture, we are not going back to that false dichotomy, fixed or growth kind of way. We're also going to be thinking about the mindset culture continuum. And we know that there are microcultures in every organization. You can have an overarching mindset culture, but then over here you might have this team or division that's extremely growth-minded, and this one over here that's more fixed-minded. And so these microcultures really matter for people's experiences in their workplace settings, on teams, whether they want to be there, whether they're competing internally against each other or not, or collaborating because they feel like more minds on the problem is going to be producing the better solutions. So how do I know, as a researcher, as a scholar who works in many organizational contexts, how do I know if I'm in more of a fixed mindset culture or more of a growth mindset culture along that culture continuum? How do I know where I am? Well, because mindset culture is a cultural feature, we can look at the cultural artifacts in those local environments. So we can analyze, what are we saying and doing? What are our practices? What are the interactions? What are the leadership messages that are being communicated that tell me that talent and intelligence is relatively fixed? It's all about the geniuses, who's in the room, right? Versus this is something that we're going to learn, grow, and develop together. The growth mindset view. Let me give you an example of what this looks like in practice. This is now a somewhat famous example, but we'll see how we understand it. So how many know about Satya Nadella's growth mindset journey? A few people, but not a lot. So Satya took over in 2014, and he inherited a Windows-centric Microsoft that was really far behind. It had lost a ton of market share. It was rife with internal competition. He did a listening session across the whole organization in his first year to see where the company sat and what he wanted to invest in with regards to his work. And someone asked him, a reporter asked him, What's it like to be at Microsoft these days? Now you're 1 year in as CEO and you've done your listening session, and he pointed to a New Yorker cartoon in which it looked like this. All the different areas of Microsoft with guns pointing towards each other. Sadly, a very American way of being. And, they were all competing internally against each other. And what he found, he talks about this himself in his own book, hit refresh. Let's see if I can talk about it. He said, Microsoft's culture had been rigid. Each employee had to prove to everyone that he or she was the smartest person in the room. Sound familiar around fixed mindset culture? Hierarchy and pecking order had taken control. Spontaneity and creativity had suffered. And worse of all, he said, the stack ranking performance metrics, the system, the management system, which, by the way, is making a comeback, especially in Silicon Valley here, stack ranking performance management systems pitted employees against each other every 6 months. Developers feared that giving away their best ideas could damage their reputation because someone else is going to get, right, the praise. They were designing software by committee, and external competition was causing folks to jump ship. So what did he do? He read Carol Dweck's book. His wife actually gave it to him for their kids. And he said, I wonder if this idea of the growth mindset could actually be applied to organizations and a business. And he said, we're going to give it a try. So he declared Microsoft the first growth mindset company in the world. And then he turned it over to Kathleen Hogan, who was in charge of his people, his chief people officer, and said, can you make this real? How do we do this? And so they started with the HR and the people process, redesigning their job recruitment, their onboarding process, their promotion, and their evaluation process to really build in some of these growth mindset behaviors and practices. Then he also applied it to his own strategy and in investments across the organization, taking it out of people and saying, okay, after hearing this, I'm going to make 4 big investments in Microsoft in different areas. But I know not all 4 are going to work. So I'm going to create learning systems that allow us to learn quickly what's working and what's not working, and then we're going to share that learning with the other parts of the organization so that we can accelerate our learning and our innovation here much more quickly. And I don't expect all 4 to work. That's going to be okay. I'm going to be okay with some losses, but that loss is going to lead to accelerated learning, and that learning is what's going to move us forward. And from that, they got cloud computing. And cloud computing is what put Microsoft back on the map, right? It is what actually started to increase market share. And what they saw over time is that the stock price significantly improved during this time, this growth mindset culture time, and it made them more resilient in moments when other tech companies, high-tech companies, were really being affected by market fluctuations, much like what we're experiencing right now. What did Satya say about this? He said, we need to always be learning from the outside, not just learning inside, but also from the outside in our competitors. We need to be insatiably curious. We need to lean into uncertainty, take risks, move quickly when we make mistakes, recognizing that failure is something that happens on the way to mastery. Recognizing that failure is what happens on the way to mastery. He said, if you take 2 kids at school, one of them has more innate capability, but is a know-it-all, and the other has less innate capability, but is a learn-it-all, the learn-it-all does better than the know-it-all, right? That's this idea of that growth mindset in action. So when we talk about mindset culture, we notice mindset culture based on the cultural norms happening on these teams and in these divisions and in these parts of these organizations. And so these fixed mindset cultures of genius, who's the smartest in the room, right? Do you either have it or you don't? It's often rife with internal competition, as we saw in Microsoft's case. And we know that we're in more of a culture of growth. It's about learning. It's about sharing that learning. So you see much more of those norms of collaboration on the teams and across the organization. When it comes to risk-taking and innovation, trying new things, experimenting with creativity, we see that in fixed mindset cultures, along that fixed mindset continuum, that mindset culture continuum, in the fixed mindset side, we see recycling what worked in the past, playing it safe, not wanting to take risks because those mistakes are going to be taken as signs that maybe our team doesn't have it. Whereas in growth mindset culture continuum side, we see much more willingness to try new ideas, but to also be trying in a way that's gathering data to see whether or not the effort we're putting in is effectively moving us to our goal. So they're taking risks and they're being resilient in the face of any mistakes, but they're actually really learning across the way. And then finally, we see unethical behavior as a big difference. In those fixed mindset cultures, you see a lot of that information hoarding, cheating, taking shortcuts. In the growth mindset cultures, you see much more commitment to integrity and ethical behavior because they don't want to short circuit the learning. And then there's big impacts also on diversity, equity, and inclusion. In fixed mindset cultures, we are trying to match our prototype of who our geniuses are. So if I were to Google right now, genius, and I look at Google Images, what faces am I going to see? Who? Einstein. You're going to see a million pictures of Einstein. Anyone else? You might see Steve Jobs. Who else? Elon Musk. You might see him. Who else? Stephen. Does anyone see the pattern? Yeah, consistently of a certain gender, of a certain racial, ethnic background, of a certain class background, right? And who does that leave out? When we are in a fixed mindset culture of genius, looking for these people who have this innate talent and ability, we're going to be subtly, and sometimes not so subtly, matching to those prototypes. That means the people we're going to be recruiting are going to be more like those individuals. The people we're promoting, especially at the highest levels, will seem more homogenous in this way. Whereas in a growth mindset culture, you still care about performance, you still care about best results, but you're not matching to this narrow prototype of who a genius is. Instead, you're looking at who actually grew the most across their career, who met the challenges, who had to overcome difficulties, knowing that that process is actually going to predict how we work in the future, overcoming challenges, not being fragile, not worrying about the ego in that way. So we have done studies on organizations, my entrepreneurs in the room, startup organizations, and looking at founders' mindsets across different companies. And we found that organizations started with founders who then created more growth mindset cultures. In this case, more fixed mindset cultures showed more unethical behaviors, more interpersonally competitive, and they were less tolerant of mistakes. Whereas those companies founded by leaders who had more growth mindset were more supportive of this risk-taking, showed greater value on effective effort. They're more likely to hire people who were different than them. They're more flexible in these moments of change and uncertainty that we find ourselves in now. And they had better bottom line outcomes. They were able to raise more money for their particular organization in their more recent funding round, matching their fundraising goals and exceeding them. And they had greater trust and commitment among the employees that they had in these early stage organizations. So I'm going to end with an example from the startup world. How many people have heard of the McBride sisters? A few people, not very many. Okay. So the McBride sisters are very interesting. They're sisters, biological sisters, who wanted to get into the wine business. And what they said, let's see, is that they really, I interviewed them, they talked about confronting this culture of genius in the wine industry. And in particular, they saw that there were a lot of gatekeepers in the wine industry. You have to think about investors, wholesalers, distributors of your product, retailers. And in particular, what they said was it's definitely an old boys club. A large part of the industry is run by a very small group of older white wealthy men. There's a lot of dynasties in wine, a lot of family lineages, right, that still run things. And a large part of the opportunity and success came from being associated with these people or being part of those families. We definitely were looked at, this is the fixed mindset, culture of genius, we were definitely looked at as not just not belonging, but being incapable ability of being successful, right? And now today, they are the largest Black-owned wine brand in the entire United States. How did they achieve that success given that fixed mindset culture that they confronted when they started? they took 3 strategies around these growth mindset cultures, creating these cultures for themselves and then for their burgeoning business as it took off. They found innovative collaborations, working with organizations and other teams that never thought they would pair with a wine brand or organization. They did measured risk-taking, figuring out each question that an investment that they made sure that they understood whether it was paying off. They built inclusive community, seeing that many people of color had been ignored by the wine industry in the United States for years, as if these people don't drink wine, and they said, these are going to be our primary targets. And we're actually going to build our community together and serve this community that's overlooked by the entire industry. And so they did that. And then they created a fund as they become more and more successful that they've given back. Talk about cultures of growth and recreating these cultures of growth. Investing in opportunity for women and people of color in agriculture programs in the food and wine industry, and creating mentorship programs so that others can come behind them. So to end here today, I just want to say that this growth mindset culture idea take seriously the idea that ability and talent is something that we can grow and expand. And it has significant consequences for us when we think of mindset outside the mind in these teams, organizations, in these cultures we create. It has impact on things like how we behave and who we become in these environments. Innovation and creativity, reaching and exceeding our strategic and our financial goals. It also inspires more trust and commitment. People want to stay in these cultures of growth teams, in these cultures of growth organizations. And it helps us ride out moments of transition and change. It makes us more resilient and adaptable in those moments. So where do we start around this? I will invite you. We have 2 measures that we've actually used in our research that are publicly available and free. You can take your own mindset triggers assessment. You can do it with your team and see your team's mindset triggers. You can also do a cues audit and look at your own team and look at the cues in your team to see where you are on the mindset culture continuum around fixed and growth mindset cultures. I also want to invite you to not do this work alone. Mindset is not just in our mind. It's not just up to us as individuals. It is something we do in community. So finding or building a growth mindset culture pod to help you as you create these mindset cultures for yourself is very powerful. It's a better way to do the work, is to do it together. And then finally, I'm going to give you the challenge that Carol gives to all of her PhD students when they first come in. And she wants to know every week, she has this report, what is one outrageous, and I'm talking about outrageously, growth-minded thing you can do for yourself this week? Because as you start to build that growth mindset muscle and creating it in community, right, that's how we actually create these sustainable and robust cultures of growth. So I will end here with this idea that what we are trying to go for is growth mindset individuals within growth mindset cultures. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you. So I think we have time for 1 or 2 questions. If anybody has questions, I'm happy to take them. Let's see. There's some questions over here. I know we have mic runners, and there's a question over here. Do we have mic runners? Yeah, 1 here and 2 over here. We'll start over here. Hi.
Hi, my name is Sangeeta. I'm from Seattle, Washington, but Canadian originally.
Okay.
My question is, would you sum the growth mindset as vulnerability? Being more vulnerable, being more open, being open to opinions as such?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So one of the ways that we think about growth mindset, I think one of the kind of myths of growth mindset is that these growth mindset cultures are very warm and fuzzy and like rainbows and unicorns all the time. But what we actually know when we study them, both in like college environments where we look at growth mindset classrooms and also in work environments, is that they're actually very demanding. Why? Because they're always demanding continuous growth and learning and development. They're not happy when anyone sits on their laurels or seems to kind of, take the foot off the gas. And so they are very rigorous. They're always tracking whether or not they're making progress along their goals. They're much more rigorous than fixed mindset cultures. Why? Because the fixed mindset culture often just relies on the gut of the local genius. So they switch, if the genius wants this today, that's what we're doing. If the genius wants that tomorrow, that's what we're doing. And everyone's changing, right? You can see this. And so I do see that we tend to think that growth mindset cultures are warmer and more like friendly, and that's not always the case, I will say that. But to your point about being open-minded, I do think that there is a quality of being more open-minded, being more humble, being able to learn from others, and actually asking other people their opinions and taking that under consideration. It doesn't mean that you're always going to agree with them, but you're certainly going to be more open and have mechanisms to gather that information, to consider it seriously, and then to act based on it. So there's more learning from more people. It's like good ideas come from everywhere in a growth mindset culture. Does that answer your question? Sure.
Hi, Jessie Rosenberg from Santa Barbara, California. Isn't it important to, like when you have a growth mindset, progressively, it's going to require potentially some burnout?
Good question.
So
Good
I just
question.
wanted to understand, where would the fixed mindset come in? Would it be a fixed mindset, or would it
be something else?
Yeah.
So here's a question about growth mindset and burnout. Okay, this is very intuitive, that if you're always learning, it's like enough learning already. I'm so burned out on the learning, put it away, right? So we studied this question, and we looked at growth mindset at the individual level, and we looked at growth mindset at the cultural level. And what we found were differences. If you are just embedded in a growth mindset at the individual level, you can be, under some circumstances, especially if you're in these fixed mindset cultures, really susceptible to burnout. Because no matter what you do in your growth mindset, it's like being a growth mindset student in a fixed mindset classroom. There's no way to use or benefit from your growth mindset there. So it's just burning you out. But if you are embedded in a growth mindset culture, we've measured this using validated inventories of burnout, and we see that being in your growth mindset in these growth mindset cultures actually protects you from burnout, because that growth mindset is actually, there's opportunities to use it, to benefit from it, and it's rewarded in those contexts. So we don't see people burning themselves out as much there. Good question. Over here, let's see where we are. There was this woman and that man first, and then maybe this next. I know I need to let you go to lunch, so maybe 2 more questions here.
Hi, my name's Sanu. I am based out of Sunnyvale here locally.
Hello.
Thank you for your presentation. It was great. So I was wondering if you've done any study, if there's any outliers that showed up in your studies about people that take growth mindset actions when they are in a group setting with the fear of judgment, and then they go back to their fixed mindset once they're out of the group setting.
Yeah, so I think this question is about how changeable is mindset, and how much do our local environments influence us, and do we go right back to our maybe default fixed mindset sometimes? This is the power of culture. You're right, that when we have strong cultural norms and strong cultures on certain teams or in certain parts of the organization or in certain learning environments, we can feel more vulnerable. We can actually engage in our own learning process, make some mistakes, learn from them in those contexts. And it is true that we are very attuned to the next class that I go to as a college student, and it's a very fixed mindset, prove and perform. You're only as smart as your last performance, right? That I'm going to take on the fixed mindset over there. So the truth is, yes, we do pay attention to these cultural norms. We often match the cultural norms because that's how we are rewarded in those contexts, either behaviorally or subtly, non-verbally. And I think that we do have a mindset, on our individual mindset, we do have kind of a chronic place we live on the mindset continuum. And in the absence of strong cultural norms, we will default to wherever we are on that mindset individual level. So you're right that that's the power and why we need to be focusing on these cultures, because that's how we get people moved there more often. One more, and then I'm gonna, maybe we could talk after. Yeah, you.
It's kind of an add-on to this question. Name's
Great.
Emmanuel. Is there room for both in an organization?
Yes.
Right, there's got to be a sweet spot.
That's right. So let's not demonize that fixed mindset at the individual level or at the organizational level. There are some places, let me ask you this question. In accounting, you really want a strong growth mindset around creativity and innovation and taking risks and blah, 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 you know? There are some places where you might want Again, it's not one or the other, it's a continuum. You might want it a little bit more towards the fixed mindset than the growth. Now, I even write about my book some accounting firms that actually have really thought about how to walk that line about mindset and where is the fixed mindset useful and where is the growth mindset useful in their own work. You can also think about legal, right? My husband is a lawyer, right? There's precedent and we have to be thinking about certain things, but there also has to be innovation and making new arguments, right? So you have to think about what is it that we're doing at the moment and what's going to actually be most useful for us there. And again, we can move, the same group of people can move between the mindsets and the mindset cultures based on what is the work that we're doing and whether or not this kind of behavior is going to benefit that work. So you're right, we need to consider that. That's a great point to end on. Thank you all. Enjoy lunch, and we'll see you back later.